Thank you all for being here today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I'd like to start by asking a question. Do we have a God who answers prayer? I believe with all of my heart that we do. Just to let you know, as you can see, I'll be reading from my tablet today. Like many people, I'm navigating some post-COVID brain fog, but I'm excited to share this important message with you. Hey, guy, come on in. So I have 3 takeaways to share with you today, but before I get to those, I want to share with you all a time when God answered a prayer of mine. This was back before I became a teacher myself, and when I was a student. There was a teacher who wasn't exactly in a saintly mood. On a whim, they had decided that they would crush our class with a pop quiz. Not just any pop quiz, but one that they had found on an online special program. I really didn't want to fail this, especially since they threatened to weight this pop quiz as a large portion of our grade. My friends and I did what we could. We begged God for mercy. We had an atheist friend who told us not to hold our breath. So I told him, just you wait. I prayed that God would crash every computer in the school. And I tell you that when we went to that computer lab, there was not a single computer in operation. In fact, there was a school-wide crash. Some of the computers didn't even turn on. My teacher decided to take this as a sign. Hey, come on in. Yeah, you're welcome. That they should have a little bit more compassion. And my atheist friend told me that this was one of the factors in his conversion. You see, God answered 2 prayers that day. 1, that I would be spared the pop quiz, but more importantly, 2, that he would save my friend, who is a Christian now. You have no idea how happy I was when my friend told me a few years ago that he's been reading his Bible every day. Another factor that he mentioned to me about his conversion was our conversations about the theory of evolution. You see, he had been taught evolution his whole life and felt that it explained things well without God. I made the case to him, as I hope to do here today, that our world is not one of blind happenstance. We have a God of love, a God who answers prayers, and one who made us in his image. You may have heard of the scientific theory of intelligent design, which my friend, Dr. Bill Dembski, describes as the study of patterns in nature that are best explained as the product of intelligence. Now, I want to draw your attention to another sort of pattern. Have you ever noticed how some people light up in certain situations? Some people thrive in social gatherings, but others find their energy where? In quiet reflection. Maybe you've wondered why certain tasks feel natural to you. This isn't coincidence. This isn't luck. It's rooted in something much deeper. Something that was carefully woven. Something that was carefully created into who we are. Today we're going to explore those very ideas, and that's why I've got 3 takeaways. The first takeaway, it's about how evolutionary psychology does not have the explanatory power that teleological psychology does. Teleology is just a fancy word that means design. Speaking of which, the second takeaway is that our brain and our temperament are evidence for God's design. Third, and most importantly, God loves you, and you deserve care. And that's why I hope to provide a space that's all about curiosity and discovery. With that being said, I'd like to introduce you to a concept that was made by my friend, Dr. Robert Carter. That's his Venn diagram there. Let me go back to it. So this comes from his article on creation.com, How to Think, Not What to Think. He made this, and his point was very simple. If your idea and my idea can explain the same piece of evidence, then that piece of evidence can't count for either side. So in other words, that purple area labeled Roman numeral 2 is all the stuff that 1 and 3 agree upon. You'll find most conversations in science are like that. For instance, both evolutionary scientists and creation scientists believe in natural selection. We believe in differential reproduction. We both believe that the universe exists. Both of us believe in change in allele frequency. Both evolutionists and ID scientists agree on many things. So we need to find some way to evaluate the explanatory power of these ideas. In other words, we need to test just how well these ideas really explain things. And I believe psychology can serve as that test. Respectfully, I believe that the design framework of psychology is much more effective than the evolutionary one. And this leads to our first takeaway. Design psychology is a better explanation. And again, I say that with all due respect to my evolutionary colleagues. But I say this because there are many problems with evolutionary psychology. For instance, this is a quote from Dr. Tim Burkhead. He's an evolutionary behavioral ecologist. He said, "But as with much evolutionary psychology, the question I ask myself is, how does one actually test these ideas? Without a concerted effort to do this, evolutionary psychology will remain in the realms of armchair entertainment rather than real science." His point was that evolutionary psychology, it's not a good scientific explanation. But before we see that, let's define what evolutionary psychology, or evo-psych, is. Charles Darwin, he says, "My object is to shew that there is no fundamental difference between man and the higher mammals in their mental faculties." And as you can see, he used the word shew as opposed to the regular word show. He's a fancy man. But this is from Professor Skell. This is Professor Dennett. He says, "Everything we value, from sugar and sex and money to music and love and religion, everything we have value for, evolutionary reasons, free-floating rationales that have been endorsed by natural selection." So, in other words, evo-psych is contending that our organ, called the brain, and our behaviors are all the product of unguided evolutionary history. However, is that a good explanation? I believe there are several good reasons as to why the evo-psych explanation doesn't work. The main problem is that all of the evo-psych explanations don't actually really explain anything. Rather, they assume a world without God, and then they try to explain all of human nature in strictly naturalistic terms. Evolutionary scientists are also dissatisfied with evo-psych for the same reasons. Now, this is Professor Skell. He's from the University of Penn State. He said, Darwinian explanations are often too supple. Natural selection makes humans self-centered and aggressive, except when it makes them altruistic and peaceable. Or natural selection produces virile men who eagerly spread their seed, except when it prefers men who are faithful, protectors, and providers. When an explanation is so supple that it can explain any behavior, it's difficult to test it experimentally, much less use it as a catalyst for science. So this next quote is actually on the screen. This is from Professor Tallis. He had an even stronger word for evo-psych. He even coined that phrase, Darwinitis, to describe the problem. He said Darwinitis is the compulsion to explain everything in Darwinian terms. even when those explanations are absurd or even false. But don't expect an evolutionary psychologist to spot that. So evolutionary psychology has a lot of problems. Think about it like this, right? Their answer to everything, the game that they're playing, is that the reason why something exists is to pass on our genes. So human trait X evolved just so we could pass on our genes. So they're saying that the fear of water evolved to pass on our genes. But at the same time, swimming evolved. That way we could pass on our genes. It says stealing evolved. That way we could pass on our genes. But sharing also evolved so we could pass on our genes. Altruism, or helping your neighbor, evolved so we could pass on our genes. But cannibalism, eating your neighbor, also evolved so we could pass on our genes. Everything from monogamy to polygamy evolved. That way we could pass on our genes. Even belief in God, they say, supposedly evolved. That way we could pass on our genes. The only thing that they say didn't evolve so we could pass on our genes is belief in evolutionary psychology, because that must obviously be true. My friend Dr. Luskin, I think he summarized it best when he said, Darwinism has little trouble looking backward at many human behaviors and finding after the fact rationalizations for how they might aid survival. And that's all that's required to play the game of evolutionary psychology. But when the games are over, however, has anyone really accounted for the origin of human behavior through a predictive theory? It makes us doubt the trustworthiness of our brain. Because after all, think about it like this. In the evolutionary scenario, our brain was haphazardly cobbled together through an unintelligent and undirected process over the course of millions of years. So why exactly should we trust it to be reliable? You might think, well, I'm using my brain and it works pretty well. But this is the problem. You're using your brain to verify your brain. What independent source of evidence do we have that our minds are actually intelligible? This is a quote from my friend Sean Doyle. He's another scientist from creation.com. He says, I think our ability to reason and the inability of materialism to account for it is indeed a powerful argument against materialism. There's no way to reduce human rationality to non-rational causes, and physical causes are non-rational causes. Therefore, human rationality is not reducible to physical causation. So there must be more to reality than the products of physical causation. But in an evolutionary, materialistic worldview, our brains could only ever produce beneficial behaviors, right? To pass on our genes, not true beliefs, so that we couldn't trust any of the beliefs formed by our brains, including the belief in materialistic evolution, which means materialistic evolution is self-referentially incoherent. To assert it is to provide reason to doubt it. In other words, in the evolutionary model, we would have reason to doubt the validity of our cognitive faculties. And that's why I again submit that I think the design explanation is a better model, because we can trust that our brains are the product of an intelligent designer. This is from my friend Dr. Carl Wieland. He says, natural selection by itself creates nothing. To select for a nerve connection, for instance, it would need the appropriate genetic information, which specifies how to make this to choose from. Evolutionary belief demands that random genetic accidents, mutations, have given rise to the new information natural selection would require, not only to make the nervous system of, say, an earthworm-like creature, but then to progressively increase its complexity all the way to the fantastic human brain and mind. And with that, we have our second takeaway. God's design is what explains the human brain and personality. As you can see from the slide there, our brain has some amazing nerve cells, otherwise known as neurons. This is from Dr. Line. He's a friend. He has PhD in neuroscience. He said, the complexity of the connections is staggering. Just staggering. Around 10 billion neurons or nerve cells, each connecting to about 1,000 others. That's about 1 trillion connections. And then there are other components playing many different roles. The complexity, it's enormous. Neurons are powerful evidence of purposeful design because they require all of their components, the cell body, the axon, the dendrites, the synapses, to be fully assembled and to function simultaneously, which would make step-by-step evolution implausible. To make things more difficult, the simultaneous evolution of electrical and chemical signaling, the synaptic architecture, and the specialized ion channels further complicates this process. The immense complexity of the neuron points to intelligent design rather than evolution. And if you think the neuron by itself is complex, the brain is a whole marvelous example of intelligent design. To quote my friend Dr. Line again, he says, for instance, if you knock out a portion of a computer circuitry, the whole thing malfunctions. But the brain has a lot of built-in redundancy. If part of it's damaged, other parts can usually take over some of the function. It's hard to even begin to comprehend the incredible complexity of the brain. So it's inconceivable that natural processes could produce it. It has such amazing machinery. In short, there are many complex factors involved when a neuron fires, which require multitudes of specific chemicals and proteins. Other transmitter chemicals, neuromodulators, alter the rate of transmitter release by the presynaptic or the transmitting neuron, or change the postsynaptic or the receiving cell's response to the transmitter, often involving several steps and intermediate compounds, hence adding extra layers of complexity. For example, transmitters bind to receptors, which causes activation of some molecules that then cause other channels to open. Dozens, if not hundreds, of different proteins, highly specific molecular machines, are required for a nerve synapse to function. On the other hand, if a computer is physically damaged, it cannot repair itself. Since there wouldn't have been any half-brained hominids or ape men, how could evolution create the ability of the brain to reconfigure itself when half of it is removed? There have even been surgeries. I was going to put this in here, but it's an amazing story. You guys know Dr. Ben Carson? Yes. He did a surgery. Up to half of the patient's brain was removed. They're still alive. Yeah. Computer can't do that. Only God can do that. So as we can see from Dr. Line's quote, the brain, it's a marvel of composite parts and molecular machines that all point to the actions of a designer. But before we get to the practical stuff, I want to highlight a few different areas of the brain in particular. So this is the prefrontal cortex. That's often referred to as the CEO of the brain, for moderating your social behavior and for helping you to achieve your complex goals. So if you've ever used a sophisticated software program, you know that such precision in task management, right? That doesn't happen by accident. Just like a well-programmed computer follows an intentional set of instructions, the prefrontal cortex, in its ability to handle complex cognitive and executive functions, mirrors the intentional design of a system that was built for high-level functioning. The hippocampus, think of that as sort of like the brain's memory chip. It's going to be storing and retrieving all the information. It has the ability to catalog your experiences and then integrate those into your long-term memory. And that's sort of like a computer's hard drive, but it has a lot more flexibility and efficiency. So you wouldn't assume that a computer's storage mechanism came together through random processes. And so the same logic applies to the hippocampus. It's an advanced, specialized system with a purpose. And for the occipital lobe processes visual information. Light enters the eye, it's converted into electrical signals, and then it travels to the occipital lobe, where the brain decodes the signals into images. So not only did God design our brains to see all of these different things, but he did this to occur almost instantaneously. If we were able to build a machine that was capable of interpreting visual data and accurately decoding it like our brain does, we would marvel at our own ingenuity. So how much more should we marvel at God's? So we can see just from these three parts of the brain that it's clear that God was involved in making this. But not only did God design our brains, he also designed our temperaments. Our biological temperaments, or our personalities, they're mapped onto certain neurological circuits. This is Nathan Marinow. He's another scientist from creation.com. He says, I believe the fact that we can even understand the mind and human behavior is reason for believing in a creator. Also, the reason why psychology can help people in the first place is because of the way we were created to respond. So, what exactly is your personality? I'll tell you what it's not. Your biological temperament, it's not your character. It has nothing to do with whether you're better or worse than anybody else. Like being tall or short, your biological temperament is exactly that. It's a part of your biology. Think of it like an operating system that God pre-designed you with. So just like an operating system governs how software and hardware interact, personality traits influence how we respond to our environment, process our emotions, and interact with others. Both systems integrate multiple components to create a cohesive, functional whole. Just as an operating system has different settings and customizations, human personalities vary, but they all follow certain underlying patterns that manage behavior, much like the design of an operating system that manages tasks on a computer. So knowing what your personality type is, it can help you have a stronger sense of identity. It can help you better relate to others. And with that being said, if you want to take out a sheet of paper, if you just want to remember your answers, we're going to do a little personality test. This is a truncated one. Just 4 questions. Just 4 questions. Don't be shy. If you want to find a result that's more accurate, you might want to go online for a full test. But, pick the option that resonates most to you. So you might kind of relate to both, but pick one that's more like you. So option E is I prefer group activities, and I get energized by social interaction. I tend to be more enthusiastic and easily excited. That's me. 2, option I prefer solitary activities and get exhausted by social interaction. I tend to be quite sensitive to external stimulation. That's sight, sound, or smell in general. So option E or option I. And for our next one, it's N versus S. So it's for N, you might say, hey, I'm very imaginative, I'm very open-minded and curious. I prefer novelty over stability and focus on hidden meanings and future possibilities. For S, you might say, oh, you're more highly practical, you're more pragmatic, you're more down to earth. You tend to have strong habits and you focus on what's happening or what's already happened. For the next one, F, you're a more sensitive person. You're more emotionally expressive. You're more empathetic, less competitive than others. And you like to focus on social harmony and cooperation. But for T, you focus more on objectivity. You focus more on rationality, prioritizing logic over your emotions. And you tend to hide your feelings and see efficiency as being more important than cooperation. And for our last one, for option J, you're more decisive, thorough, you're highly organized, you value clarity and predictability, and closure, preferring structure and planning over something like spontaneity. And option P, you're very good at improvising and spotting opportunities. You're more flexible, relaxed, nonconformist, and you prefer keeping your options open. So if you want to take a full test, go to this website here. You're going to get like a 4-letter result. I don't know if you can see that there, like ISTJ or ENFP. So your result should be something like that. This test will give you 5-letter combinations because they're also testing for an additional personality dimension. But this actually leads me to the third and the most important takeaway. Please learn to love yourself. Jesus said that thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, right? He could have just stopped and said, love your neighbor, and left it there. But he added, as you love yourself. Why? Because he wants you to know that you're his delight and you have nothing to be ashamed of. So you deserve care. God loves you. And I want to share with you guys the story of what prompted me to actually become a crisis counselor. So I used to live in Florida, and what ended up happening is there was a Target that was like only a few miles away from my home. I would bike there like basically every day. I liked going there. And before I was about to go into the store, I just walked past this man sitting on the red bench. He had a little bag next to him. I walked into the store and something inside my heart told me, you might want to go back out and see if he's all right. When I went to talk with him, he told me his whole life story. He had an autoimmune disease. His wife was sick and dying. Just lost his home and lost his job. Everything had completely fallen apart. He had 2 things in that bag. He had some food. It was going to be his last meal because he also had a gun in that bag. And he said that after he ate that, he was going to go off into a clearing that was by the store and shoot himself. And so he and I spoke for a few hours until the sun went down. I had gone back to my home, gotten a few things for him, given them to him. And he told me, I don't know why you stopped to talk to me, but had you not done that, I wouldn't be here. I'm not going to end my life because you listened. And that's all he needed. And sometimes that's all any of you might need. So I became a crisis counselor after that. I realized that there are so many people in this world who are hurting and they're in pain. And you can text, if you feel more comfortable, 741-741. That's the company I work with, Crisis Text Line. But if you want to actually talk to somebody, call the number 988. It's free. It's confidential. It's available 24/7. You can even call these people at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. They'll be there for you. They have counselors round the clock working. This device here, I brought one as an example. This is for PTSD, panic attacks, anxiety, all these different mental distress issues. Little device looks like this. This is a smart AI calming companion. I partnered with this company. If you use the code Christ Jesus Ministries, or CJM, you'll get 30% off. But what this device does, you can see it lights up, makes a little sound. It helps you guide your breath. It has multi-sensory stimulants. So this here is a scented plate. It's got peppermint, lavender, bergamot. They have a few other scents. Comes in different colors, purple, blue. I think there's a bronze. It's designed to help burnout, anxiousness, and it'll help you feel more calm. It works in 3 minutes. It's drug-free, risk-free. You can just pick this up. This doesn't need to be prescribed to you. So if you want, check it out and use the code CJM and you'll get 30% off. But please know that God really does love you. He loves you quite a lot. And if there's ever a point in time where you feel like you don't want to wake up the next day, please know that God said that his mercies are new every morning. Please know that he's going to miss you the next day. So please hold on one more day. If you feel like you're in a great amount of pain and in a great amount of sorrow, please talk to someone. You might end up actually talking to me if you text 741-741. But If you call 988 or text 741-741, you'll be connected with somebody who's going to sit and listen, and they'll be there with you as long as you need. Another thing that you might want to know is that if you are a woman and you would rather, say, talk to another woman, you can just go on and ask them, hey, could I be transferred to a woman? And they'll be happy to do that for you. That's no problem. So more than anything, please know that you all deserve care. You guys have been a wonderful audience, and I could not have asked for better listeners. I thank you all for being here, and I hope that you guys have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you, and remember, the truth saves. Oh, yes.